you know, a traditional duck decoy, as everybody knows, is like one's in this book. And this is a green-winged teal. And that's a traditional duck decoy, just out of basswood now. But in, you know, earlier years, whatever wood they had laying around. It's partially out of wood, and it's out of canvas, and it's out of metal wire. So what first thing I do, I made a little pattern, which this is for the base, for the center rib of the decoy, which is right here. This is the center rib. And these are filler pieces for like the shoulders of the decoy. So that's kind of what it looks like unassembled and in pieces. First thing I did, I just kind of drew up a little pattern for the base, cut it out on the bandsaw. Then I drew a pattern for the back of the decoy. And the tail, I don't know if you can see that here, but the tail has a little split in it. And I cut this split in the very back here with the bandsaw. And the reason for this is to accept the wire that finishes off the back of the decoy. Otherwise you can't anchor the wire any other way. So see how that is? So what I'll do, I'm going to put this together. I'll show you how I put it together. I kind of eye this up. Hold it on here. Turn it over. And look about where the center of the round parts are on the base. I just eye it up. And when I get it to where I want it, then I take my pencil, draw a line on each side, which I've done already. But I just draw a line here and a line there. So I just put a little bit of wood glue on there. Just like that. Just stick that on there. You have to make sure though the center of the front of this cutout here is even with the front of your blank, your base. You don't want it back. Then you'll have to carve that all off. So I just make sure it's even with the front or a little proud of the front, but never back from the front. So I'll put that on there, get this glued up quick. There's one nail. And I just run a couple more in there. There. That's attached. But you can clamp this down if you don't have a nail gun. Drill a couple pilot holes and put a couple screws in. It'll do the same thing. So the next thing I did, I'm going to make this area right here. It's all out of solid wood. So to do that, I just took a block of wood. It's whatever's laying around. Put it on my base, just like that. Then I took a pencil, drew this on there, took it on the bandsaw, cut it out, and this made one for the other side, which is what these two blocks are here. So I'll glue these on. Put a little glue on there. Just shoot it with one nail. I'll give it one more. Same thing on the other side. And I'll nail that up. There. Now that fills in for where the shoulders are going to go on this. So here's a head that I have sort of roughed out. And see how that'll mount on there? That's how you make the shoulder part. So what I'll do is I'm going to turn on this dust collector, and I have just a cut saw, my hogging bit, and I'll see how this base, these protrude out. You have to cut those off. If I was at home, I would go on the bandsaw and just eye this up and cut that corner right off. But I'll just do it with this quick, and I'll turn this on. Oop, over here. Fire this baby up. There. Shut that off. See, and there we have the shoulders all rounded off. It just took a couple of minutes. So the next thing I did on the pattern I made, I just took my bandsaw and just cut out a head, cut out a duck head. And this is the one that is about done. This is the size that it should be. And this one goes on this decoy here. But this one I did for this demo. This is huge yet. But I just carved in I just roughed it down for you so you can see what it looks like. And then what I'll do, yep, that looks pretty good right there. So what I'll do now is I'm gonna drill a hole in the middle of this guy. It's a 5/16 drill bit, and what I'm going to do is drill a hole in this and then put this dowel pin in there, and that's what's going to hold it to the decoy. So I'll drill this out. This is a dowel pin center. I don't know if you've ever done woodworking, but when you want to center a dowel pin, they sell these for $1, or you get like 6 of them. And what you do is you use this center, just kind of eye it up to where it looks good. That looks pretty good right there. Push that down. Now I have a mark to where the dowel has to go on the body. So back to the glue. Stick that sucker in there. There we go. So now if I was at home, I would just chuck this drill bit on my drill press so it's fairly straight, but I'm not. So I'll just wing it here. And what you want to make sure you do is use when you're woodworking, use brad point drill bits to drill through wood. Make sure you use a metal drill bit, because I just hit that nail. And you might hit the screws that are holding it, and I would have destroyed that brad point bit. So use a metal bit, because it doesn't matter how clean the edges of this hole is. So, okay. These guys are hard. Okay. So what I'll do now is that the edge of this dowel pin, when they make these, they taper them a little bit so they go in the hole easily. So I'll just re-taper that a little bit because I took the taper off. And with that dowel pin center, I have that head located, hopefully in the proper place. That doesn't look too bad, okay? So now the reason I'm doing this before I put the canvases on is so I can carve this back and remove this when I put the canvas on. Then you shove it back on when the canvas is done. So I'll show you what I do now. You can put it straight. You can turn the head if you want. Do whatever you want. I'll turn it slightly. You can turn one left. It doesn't matter. Hell, you can turn it completely around if you want. Or probably about like that. But you have to locate it where you want it now before you cover it with canvas. Because once you carve it, it has to go in the same spot or it's not going to look correct. So I'll just put that guy just a little bit off to the side there. And I'll turn this on and I'll just carve the edges off and I'll blend the head with the shoulder area. There. I could fiddle around with this for a while, but that's not too bad. You'll see how I have that all blended in? And see when I take the head off, and if I put it on the wrong way, you have to make sure it goes on the right way because nothing works out now. So it'll go on about like that. Okay? So that's basically the carving. There's not a lot of carving on this thing. Well, the next thing I would do on this, though, is along this spine, along the backbone, I would take these edges off. Otherwise, the canvas will hit this. So I just ease the edges a little. I'll turn that on. I'm going to ease the edges on this just a little bit. I'll clip the corner of this tail just a little. There. Clip that edge a little bit on the tail. And underneath, I'll leave it square. So see how I just relieved those edges a little bit on this. Okay? So, now I'll stick the head back on this dude. Goes about there. Now's the fun part. Time for the wires. I made this jig. It took me about an hour. And this was scraps I had laying on the floor in the shop. What I did, this is for bending your wires. Because on these different size decoys, you're going to need a different size diameter circle to make the proper wire shape. So it looks like a cake or something. What that looks like. So I see how I made that? I just made all different size circles, and these are little dowel pins I had laying around from my machine shop. Just it'll hold your wire when you're bending it. And how I made that, and if anybody has hole saws, these are the ones I used. I just took a different size hole saw for each one of these. See how that fits right over that? And this is the plug that came out of the middle. And when you use a hole saw, here's how this is together. They have a 1/4 inch bit. That's what a hole saw, the standard hole saw. 1/4 inch bit is the pilot. So when I drilled them all, I took a long leg screw and just ran it down the middle of them. It was perfect. I used a 1/4 inch leg screw. And that's how I made it. It took no time to make that. The bottom one, though, I didn't have a hole saw that big, so I just cut it on a bandsaw. So that's how you make the bending jig. It's really easy. And one thing you'll need on the bending jig is this little dude right here. This is for the tail. It's the only place you'll ever use this. And what it is, it's this round plug, but I cut one side flat on the bandsaw. And I'll show you why. So let's start with the tail wire. And on my little notch that I cut in there on my bandsaw, this wire is going to fit right in that notch. If you didn't have that little notch in there, it'd be hard to fasten that anyway. There's no way to really fasten that. So I'll show you the first time I did this, I bent one for the tail. I used the smallest of my jig there, but I didn't have the flat spot in there. So bent that around. That's a pretty nice shape right there for the tail. I'll cut the extra wire off. The man that actually did these decoys that I showed you, he had a chart. He does hundreds of these a year. He had a chart of every decoy, of every wire, every exact length, so he didn't waste wire. It took him years to make that chart. He's a really nice guy, but if you're not going to do a lot of them, I wouldn't bother. And see how when I did the wire without the flat spot jig, see how that tail doesn't look right? It's not seated properly in there. So what I did, I'll unbend this wire a little bit. I put the wire on here where the flat spot is. Took a clamp, clamped that down. Then when I bent it, I get a curved piece of wire with the flat spot. That fits right in that tail perfectly. That's how you make the tail one. That was the one I wasn't sure how to do exactly. So that's how you make that one. And then you just kind of tap that in there. Now the next thing I do is I take my little brads, or little staples. These are called number 5 staple 3/8. I just had them laying around. I've had them for probably 30 years. Then I take my pair of pliers. I hold that staple pretty substantially in those pliers. You could use vice grips too if you wanted to, if you can't hold the pliers tight. Push that in there. I'm going to try and do this so you can see it. Take my hammer and tap that in there. Only at home I have a table that's not made out of plastic. So they go in real easy with the solid table. But see how that goes in there? That holds the wires down. So I'll put one more in there. You don't want to try and grab these and put them in because you'll smash the heck out of your hands. You don't want to do that. So, and I tried needle nose pliers and it just didn't work well. So I'll put one more in here. And I always put, they're never straight staples. There's always one that's a little crooked. I always put the crooked side out. Because if you put the crooked side in and you start hammering, the hammer won't work anymore because it'll get too, it'll turn the wrong way. So I put the crooked side out. There. And then I just tap that right in. There's one wire that goes right across this shoulder area. Goes right across here. You can feel it on this decoy. There's a wire that goes right here. And it helps the canvas curve around. So you want to put one little wire back here. And then he put 3 more on here and I did the same. So I'll go with the next one. I started at the back and I worked my way forward is how I did it. So I numbered my jigs, so I'll go to number 3. Bend it around. See, but when you straighten it out, it opens it up, and you get a nice curve to it. See how nice that curve is on that? So then I just kind of lay it across there. That looks about right. Then I guess about where I want to cut that wire. Somewhere in there. This wire, this is 14 gauge, and we use galvanized. Make sure you use galvanized because if you put the canvas over it and it gets wet, it's going to rust underneath. So just make sure it's, and this stuff, I got this whole roll. I seen it at Tractor Supply for $8. It's 100 feet here, so it's a ton. It's good. So on these now, what I did is I kind of guessed to where I wanted them. Like, that looks pretty good. So I marked it now, where I want my staples. Put a mark there. I put a mark on one side where the wire's going to go. Mark on the other side. Okay. Then I took a staple with the wire out of the way. That in there. Okay, I set 2 staples in place. Then I tap them in, but not all the way, of course, just to make them solid. Then I took my wire, stuck them in place, and it was a lot easier to hold them. Then you can adjust it to where you think you want it. Because it's almost impossible. You could even mark it if you wanted to. I didn't do it. But you could say, I want that one there. There's number 2. So I'll do one more, and then I'll show you how to do the canvas because we'll run out of time. So I'll use number 4 on the next one because I want it a little wider. It'll be the widest part of the decoy. Now this one, I'll bend in the ends a little bit. So when I put it on, I'll have room to nail it. I'm only doing 1 staple each piece of wire, but when I did this at home, because I had time, I put 2. You know, just to really hold it. So this is just to get it done quick. So see how quickly I built this thing? I have not spent much time on that. So we'll pretend the other rib is done because we need to get to the canvas part. You have to make sure like the wires aren't sticking out that can cut the canvas. I have one sticking out here a little bit. Problem getting some of the staples in. This is just a dowel pin, a little piece of steel, whatever you want to use. You can also use this to tighten the staples up. I did that on this other one. What that did, it bent the staple right completely around that wire. That's on there. So this really helped, you know, this little piece of steel. The canvas. We had discussions on that, my wife and myself, and we weren't sure which one to use. So this is the good stuff. This is from a fabric store. This is the heavier stuff, is the cheap stuff. And this works really well. This is the stuff, it was what, $11? It's painter's canvas, and I think it was like 6 foot by 10 footer. It was gigantic. And it works great. So you can use a staple gun. I have tacks, I have tacks. We bought an old upholstery thing just at an antique store, and it had these little tacks to use for upholstery. These seem to work good, or you can use a staple gun. But wide staples on a round base, you'd have to pound them in anyway because the edges would stick out, you know, because they're flat. So we just use these little tacks. So they just cut a hunk of canvas, but you have to make sure there's extra so it can go around the front, around the back, and the same piece has to go around underneath here too. So it has to be a pretty good sized piece to do this. So I'll take one of these brads, kind of center it a little bit. That ought to work. And these are so sharp, these little tacks, you can just start them with your finger. And I put them right in the middle of my board, my base plate. I stick them right about in the middle. As I put all these. Tack that down. This is where it gets interesting. Trying to wrap these things. We did the center line first. Apply. There's 2 ways you can tap these in. Or you can squeeze them in. This way too if you want. But tapping in seemed to work good for me. Just didn't put this one in all the way so we could always take it off at this point. See, now we have the center ribs stretched. It's all down. Now you just kind of fiddle with it. You pull on the canvas. Yeah, you can use water on this too. We did it dry on this stuff. I'll do it quickly. You get the idea. It's not very, and what's complicated is the tail part. But you have to fiddle around with it. You get the whole bird done. put one in the bottom of this tail area here, and then you have to have a fold in the back that you cut and crease. Like this one, there's a fold right in it. Once it's all tacked, you just cut off the excess. And for the banding, which is this piece that's around here, to clean up the whole edge. Doesn't matter what your cut looks like on the main canvas, because you're going to cover it up with this banding. For the banding, we used the good stuff. Took a piece of this good stuff, took a square, folded this over on the square, just like that. Squirty bottle, dollar store. Got that wet, and took a hot iron, you iron it. So then you take your square away, squirt it a few more times, and you keep ironing it. And what you'll get is a sharp edge. So then after you get what you want, I measured 3/4 of an inch, I made mine. Put this on there, took a utility knife, cut it off, and I had a perfect piece of banding. These are actually a little larger tacks. And if you can find them, find the antique looking ones. These are like 50 years old, and they're really neat looking instead of the round ones. And see, I just started the banding in the end, put a tack in, pounded it, and just wrapped the banding around and tacked it as I went along. That's about it. Make sure the seam that you iron, the really nice seam, goes on top. So the seam that's not great is on the base. And then I had extra banding. Make sure you have extra. I pulled it tight, then I cut it off, and then put one tack. So there's 2 tacks in this very end there. So that's how you attach the banding. So then what I did, I took some gesso. I put a coat of gesso on it, and I only gessoed half of this one so you can see the difference. It's hard, and it shrinks it because it's cotton. Gesso is a water-based, so it shrunk it a little bit. So it's tight here, and over here, look at how soft that is. That's 2 coats of gesso is what did that. So when you get it all gessoed, then you're ready for your acrylic paint or whatever you want. You can put a flag on these things. You can paint whatever you want on this, or you can make it look like a decoy. So after that gesso dries, I'll find the hole where the head goes. Just kind of located a hole. Clean up all the cloth out of the area. There you be. I would put the head on, glue it in place, and then paint it, and then you can blend it so it doesn't look like the head's glued on. That's what I would do. Now, if you ever located eyes, what you do is you draw in one eye about where you think it should go. Then you mark a little line on top of the head. Then you look down on it, mark a line on the other side of the head. See that? It's about where I want the eyes. Then you look at that line and you draw the other eye in. So I've just located 2 eyes. Drill a pilot hole, and these are antique upholstery tacks. That's what I'm going to make my eye out of. It doesn't matter what you use. It's a decoy. Put a little glue in there. Tap it in place so you bend it. There you go. That's it. So.